At Christmas, my father snapped and said words that I will never forget. He looked me dead in the eyes in front of the entire family and said, "You are just a burden. You have always been a burden." And the worst part is not what he said. The worst part is that a small piece of me had always believed it. But what happened after that night, what happened in the months that followed, is something my father never saw coming. None of them did. And honestly, neither did I. But before I tell you how this story ends, I need to take you back to the beginning, because you cannot understand the weight of that Christmas night unless you understand everything that came before it. My name is Marcus, and I grew up in a small house on the east side of Cleveland, Ohio. It was the kind of house where the walls were thin enough to hear every argument and the love was thin enough to feel every silence. My father, Raymond, was a man built from pride and disappointment. He worked at a manufacturing plant for 27 years, and I think somewhere along the way he started to believe that the world owed him something it was never going to give. He was not a monster. I want to be clear about that. He was not the kind of man who came home and threw things or raised his fists. His violence was quieter than that. It lived in his words, in his sighs, in the way he could look right through you like you were not even there. And for most of my childhood, that is exactly how he looked at me. My mother, Diane, was the opposite. She was warmth in human form. She worked double shifts as a nursing assistant and still came home with enough energy to ask me about my day, to help me with my homework, to tell me that I was going to be something special one day. She was the reason I survived that house. She was the buffer between me and the coldness that my father carried everywhere he went. But even she could not protect me from everything. I had an older brother named Vincent. Vincent was everything my father wanted in a son. He was tall and athletic and loud and confident. He played football in high school and got a partial scholarship to a state university. My father would go to every single one of Vincent's games. He would wear the team colors and shout from the stands, and afterwards he would take Vincent out for burgers and talk about the plays like they were reliving a war together. I went to a few of those games too. I sat in the stands and watched my father light up in a way he never did at home. At least not for me. I was different. I was quiet and small and more interested in books than sports. I liked drawing and I liked writing stories and I liked building little worlds inside my head where things made sense. My father did not know what to do with a kid like me. I think in his mind a son was supposed to be a reflection of himself, and when he looked at me he did not see anything he recognized. So he stopped looking. By the time I was 12, I had learned to become invisible in my own home. I would come in through the back door, eat dinner without saying much, and disappear into my room. My father and I could go entire weeks without exchanging more than a handful of words. And the words we did exchange were never the ones I needed to hear. There was one moment that I have never been able to shake. I was 13 years old and I had won a short story contest at school. It was a city-wide competition and I placed first out of over 200 entries. My English teacher, Mrs. Calloway, made a huge deal about it. She called my mother and told her that I had a real gift. My mother cried on the phone, and when I got home she hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. She made my favorite dinner and put the little certificate on the refrigerator, like it was a diploma from Harvard. That night my father came home late from work. He walked past the refrigerator, grabbed a beer, and sat down in front of the television. My mother said, "Raymond, look at what Marcus won today." He glanced at the certificate for maybe 2 seconds and said, "That is nice." Then he turned back to the television. That was it. "That is nice." 2 words. And I stood there in the kitchen holding my plate of food and I felt something crack inside me. Not break. Not yet. Just crack. If this story is hitting close to home for you, I want you to know that you are not alone. There are so many people watching this right now who grew up feeling invisible in their own families. And if that is you, I want you to drop a comment below and just say, "I understand." You do not have to share your whole story. Just those 2 words. Because sometimes knowing that someone else out there gets it is enough to make the weight a little lighter. As the years went on, the distance between my father and me only grew. Vincent graduated from college and got a decent job in sales. He moved about an hour away, but he came home often enough to keep his place as the golden child firmly intact. Meanwhile, I graduated high school with honors and got accepted to a university on an academic scholarship. The day I told my parents, my mother screamed with joy. My father said, "Make sure you pick something practical." That was his version of congratulations. Make sure you do not waste it. Make sure you do not embarrass us. Make sure you pick something that actually makes money. The subtext was always the same. Make sure you do not turn out to be the disappointment I already think you are. I studied communications in college and discovered a passion for digital media and content creation. This was back when the industry was still relatively new, and most people did not take it seriously. My father certainly did not. Whenever I came home for holidays and tried to explain what I was studying, he would just shake his head and say, "I do not understand what any of that means." And then Vincent would start talking about his sales numbers, and my father's eyes would light up again, and just like that, I was invisible once more. I graduated college and moved to Chicago. I got an entry-level job at a small marketing agency, and I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I took on extra projects and taught myself skills that no one asked me to learn. I was building something. Slowly and quietly, just like I had always done everything. And for the first few years, nobody noticed. My salary was modest, my apartment was tiny, and every time I called home, my father would ask me how much I was making, and when I told him, he would go quiet for a moment, and then say, "Well, Vincent just got another promotion." Every single time. It did not matter what I accomplished. It was never enough, or more accurately, it was never the right kind of accomplishment. It was never the kind of thing my father could brag about at the plant or bring up at family barbecues. I was not scoring touchdowns. I was not closing deals. I was just sitting in front of a computer doing something he could not understand and therefore something he could not value. When I was 26, my mother got sick. It started with fatigue, and then came the weight loss, and then came the diagnosis, stage 3 breast cancer. The news hit our family like a freight train. My mother, who had held everything together for as long as I could remember, was suddenly the one who needed holding. I wanted to move back to Cleveland immediately, but my mother would not let me. She said, "Marcus, you have worked too hard to build your life. Do not throw it away for me. I will be fine," but she was not fine. The treatments were brutal, the surgeries were long, and through it all, my father walked around the house like a ghost. He did not know how to handle it. He did not know how to be soft. He did not know how to sit beside her bed and just hold her hand without trying to fix something. My mother told me all of this during our phone calls. She never said it with resentment. She said it with sadness, like she had accepted a long time ago that Raymond was a man who could only love in the ways he had been taught, and no one had ever taught him very well. Now here is where the story starts to turn, and I need you to pay close attention, because what happened next set the stage for everything that would come later, including that terrible Christmas night. During the 18 months of my mother's treatment, I drove back to Cleveland every single weekend. Every single one. It was a 5-hour drive each way, and I did it 52 weekends in a row without missing one. I would leave Chicago on Friday after work, drive through the night, spend Saturday and Sunday helping my mother, and then drive back Sunday night so I could be at work Monday morning. I helped her to her appointments. I sat with her during chemo. I cooked her meals and cleaned the house and handled the insurance paperwork that my father could not figure out. I did all of this without being asked and without expecting anything in return, because that is what you do for the people you love. Vincent came home maybe once a month, sometimes less. He always had an excuse. Work was busy, his girlfriend needed him, he was not feeling well, and every time he did show up, my father treated it like a hero is homecoming. Oh, Vincent drove all the way here to see his mother. Vincent brought flowers. Vincent is such a good son. Meanwhile, I was in the kitchen washing dishes after cooking dinner for the 5th weekend in a row, and no one said a word. My mother noticed, though. She always noticed. One night, when everyone else had gone to bed, she took my hand and said, "Marcus, I see you. I see everything you do, and I need you to know that it matters. I need you to know that you matter." I cried that night. I sat in my old bedroom in that small house with the thin walls, and I cried like I was 13 years old again, standing in the kitchen, holding my plate of food, waiting for my father to see me. My mother went into remission after 18 months of treatment. It was the greatest relief of my life. She was not completely out of the woods, but the doctors were optimistic, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Around the same time, something was happening in my professional life that I had not told anyone about. I had been working on a side project, a digital media company that I had been building in whatever spare time I had between my full-time job and driving to Cleveland every weekend. It was a content strategy firm that helped small businesses build their online presence, and I had been quietly signing clients and growing the business for almost 2 years. By the time my mother went into remission, the company was generating enough revenue for me to leave my day job and go full-time. And that is exactly what I did. Within a year, the company had grown beyond anything I had imagined. I hired a team. I moved into a real office. I was landing contracts with major brands, and my revenue had crossed into 7 figures. I was 30 years old, and I had built something from nothing, something real, something valuable, and I had done it all while driving 5 hours every weekend to take care of my mother while my father watched television, and my brother sent text messages saying, "Sorry, I cannot make it this week." I did not tell my family about the business, not the full scope of it anyway. My mother knew I had started something on my own and she was proud of me, but I kept the details vague. I was not hiding it out of secrecy. I was hiding it because I had learned a long time ago that sharing my accomplishments with my father only led to silence or dismissal, and I was tired of offering pieces of myself to someone who did not want but them. And that brings us to Christmas. If you are still with me right now, I want you to do something. I want you to hit that subscribe button. Not because I am asking for numbers, but because this story is about to take a turn that you genuinely will not see coming, and I do not want you to miss it. I put everything into telling these stories, and if they mean something to you, then subscribing is the best way to make sure you hear the rest. All right, let us keep going. It was December 23rd, and the whole family was gathering at my parents' house for Christmas Eve dinner the following night. My mother had been planning it for weeks. She was in remission and feeling stronger, and she wanted everyone together. She wanted a real Christmas, the kind we used to have before everything got complicated. I drove in from Chicago that morning. I brought gifts for everyone. I had spent weeks picking them out. For my mother, I bought a cashmere blanket and a first edition copy of her favorite book. For my father, I bought a nice watch. Nothing too flashy because I knew he would reject anything that felt like showing off, but something quality. Something that said, "I see you and I respect you, even if you have never said the same to me." For Vincent, I got a bottle of his favorite bourbon and a leather wallet. And for Vincent, his girlfriend Sandra, I got a gift card to her favorite restaurant, because we did not know each other well enough for me to pick something personal. I arrived at the house around noon, and my mother met me at the door with a hug that lasted a full 30 seconds. She looked good. Tired, but good. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and for a moment, standing there in the doorway, I felt like a kid again. Like maybe this time things would be different. My father was in the living room watching a football game. He nodded at me when I walked in. Not a hello, not a how. Was the drive? Just a nod. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I was there for my mother. Vincent and Sandra arrived later that afternoon. The moment they walked through the door, the entire energy of the house changed. My father stood up from his chair, something he had not done when I arrived, and went to shake Vincent his hand and clap him on the back. "Oh, there he is," my father said. "There is my boy." I stood in the kitchen helping my mother chop vegetables, and I heard those words, and I felt that old familiar crack widen just a little bit more. Christmas Eve dinner was nice on the surface. My mother had made a beautiful spread, turkey and ham and all the sides. She had set the table with her good china and lit candles and put on Christmas music. We sat down together, and for a little while it felt almost normal, almost warm. My father even laughed a few times, which was rare. Vincent told stories about his job, about a big client he had landed, about how he and Sandra were thinking about moving in together. My father listened to every word like it was gospel. At some point during dinner, my mother turned to me and said, "Marcus, why do not you tell everyone about your business?" She said it with such pride in her voice. She wanted to give me a moment. She wanted the family to see what I had built. I hesitated because I knew how this would go. But my mother's eyes were so hopeful, and I could not say no to her, so I started talking. I explained that I had started a digital media company, that we had grown to a team of 12 people, that we were working with some well-known brands, that the company had crossed $1 million in revenue in its first full year of operation. The table went quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from being impressed. the kind of quiet that comes from not knowing what to say. Sandra said, "Oh wow, that is amazing." She seemed genuinely happy for me. Vincent said nothing. He just took a long drink from his glass. And my father? My father looked at me with this expression I had seen 1,000 times before. It was not pride. It was not curiosity. It was suspicion. Like he did not believe me, like I was making it up to get attention. He said $1 million, and I said yes, and he said, "Doing what exactly?" And I started to explain again, but he cut me off and said, "I just do not understand how you make that kind of money sitting in front of a computer. It does not make sense." My mother jumped in and said, "Raymond, it is a real business. Marcus has worked so hard." And my father said, "I am not saying it is not real, Diane. I am just saying I do not understand it." And then he turned to Vincent and said, "Now, Vincent, tell me more about that client you were talking about." Just like that, the conversation was over. My moment was over. And I sat there holding my fork and staring at my plate, and I felt everything I had been carrying for 30 years pressing down on my chest like a concrete slab. After dinner, we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. The conversation was lighter, and I had mostly retreated into myself. I was sitting in the corner armchair, the same one I used to sit in as a kid when I wanted to disappear. My mother brought me a slice of pie and squeezed my shoulder, and that small gesture almost broke me. Then Vincent said something that started the avalanche. He was talking about finances and expenses, and he mentioned casually that he had been helping our parents out with some bills. He said it like it was no big deal, but there was a smugness to it. A look he gave me like, "See, this is what a real son does." And I do not know what came over me. Maybe it was the exhaustion of 30 years of silence. Maybe it was the 500 hours I had spent driving back and forth to Cleveland. Maybe it was the way my father had dismissed my entire life as work over dinner, but I said, "Actually, I have been sending money to Mom too. I have been covering her prescription costs for the past year." The room went still. My mother looked at me with wide eyes. She had asked me not to tell anyone about that. She had said it would make your father feel bad. And she was right, because the moment those words left my mouth, my father's face changed. It went from passive to dark in the span of a heartbeat. He said, "What?" And I said, "I have been helping with Mom's medical costs. The insurance does not cover everything, and I wanted to make sure she had what she needed." And my father stood up. He actually stood up from his chair, and his face was red and his hands were shaking, and he said, "So what? You think you are better than us now? You think because you have some fancy computer job you can come in here and throw money around and make the rest of us look bad?" I said, "Dad, that is not what I am doing. I am just trying to help." And he said, "Help? You want to talk about help? Where were you when your mother was sick? Where were you when she needed someone here every day? Not just on weekends. You drove in on Fridays and drove out on Sundays, and you think that makes you some kind of hero?" I could not believe what I was hearing. I looked at my mother, and she had tears in her eyes. I looked at Vincent, and he was staring at the floor. Sandra looked like she wanted to disappear. I said, "Dad, I was here every single weekend for 18 months. I drove 10 hours round trip every week while working full-time and building a business. I was here." And my father took a step toward me and pointed his finger at my chest, and that is, when he said it, that is when he said the words that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He said, "You were never here." Not really. You were always off in your own little world with your books and your drawings and your computer nonsense. You were never present. You were never what this family needed. You are just a burden, Marcus. You have always been a burden. The room was so quiet I could hear the Christmas music still playing softly from the kitchen. Jingle Bells, that is what was playing while my father called me a burden. I will never hear that song the same way again. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not throw anything or storm out. I just looked at him. I looked at this man who I had spent my entire life trying to earn love from, and I saw him clearly for the first time. I saw a man who was so afraid of his own inadequacy that he had to diminish everyone around him to feel tall. I saw a man who could not celebrate his son's success because it reflected the risks he had never had the courage to take. I saw a man who was not cruel by nature but cruel by habit, and in that moment something inside me did not crack. It did not break. It shifted, like a tectonic plate moving deep beneath the surface. The ground above looked the same, but everything underneath had changed out. I set my coffee cup down on the end table. I stood up. I walked to the closet and put on my coat. My mother grabbed my arm and said, "Marcus, please do not go, please." And I hugged her. I held her for a long time and I whispered in her ear, "I love you, Mom. I will call you tomorrow." And then I walked out the front door and got in my car and drove 5 hours back to Chicago on Christmas Eve. I did not cry until I hit the highway, and then I cried for about an hour straight. The kind of crying where your whole body shakes and you cannot see the road and you have to pull over at a rest stop and just sit there in the dark with the engine running and the heat blowing and try to remember how to breathe. Now, if you think this is where the story gets sad and stays sad, you are wrong. Because what happened over the next 6 months changed everything, and I mean everything. After that Christmas, I made a decision. I was not going to cut my family off. I was not going to send angry letters or make dramatic phone calls. I was going to do something much harder than that. I was going to stop performing. I was going to stop auditioning for my father's love. I was going to stop shrinking myself to fit into the small box he had built for me. I was going to live my life fully and openly, and if he could not handle that, then that was his problem, not mine. I threw myself into my business with a new kind of energy. Not the desperate, frantic energy of someone trying to prove their worth, but the calm, steady energy of someone who already knows their worth and is just building on it. I expanded the company. I launched new services. I started speaking at industry conferences. I was featured in a business magazine. I bought my first home. Not a mansion, but a beautiful 3-bedroom townhouse in a nice neighborhood in Chicago. I furnished it with things I loved, and I filled it with light, and I made it a place where I could breathe. I kept in touch with my mother. I called her 3 times a week. I still sent money for her prescriptions. I still drove to Cleveland once a month to see her, but I stopped going to the house when my father was there. My mother understood. She did not like it, but she understood. Then something happened that no one expected. In March, about 3 months after that Christmas, Vincent lost his job. The company he worked for went through a massive round of layoffs, and he was one of the casualties. It hit him hard. He had built his entire identity around that job, just like my father had built his entire identity around the plant. Without it, he did not know who he was. He burned through his savings in 2 months. He started drinking more. Sandra left him. And suddenly, the golden child was not so golden anymore. My father did not handle it well. He could not understand how his perfect son could fall so hard. He tried to help in the only way he knew how, by telling Vincent to toughen up and get another job. But the job market was brutal, and Vincent's confidence was shattered, and my father's tough love only made things worse. In May, my mother called me and asked if I would be willing to help Vincent. Not with money, with a job. She said, "Marcus, your brother is struggling. I know things between you two are complicated, but he needs help and you are the only one in a position to give it." I thought about it for a long time. I thought about every time Vincent had sat silently while my father dismissed me. Every time he had taken credit for being the good son while doing a fraction of what I did. Every time he had looked at me with that smug expression like he knew he was the favorite and he enjoyed it. And then I thought about my mother. And I said yes. I offered Vincent a position at my company, an entry-level position, because that is what he was qualified for. I did not give him special treatment, and I did not give him a title he had not earned. But I gave him a chance, and to Vincent's credit, he took it. He moved to Chicago, he showed up every day, he worked hard, and slowly, over the course of several months, he started to rebuild himself. But here is the part that really matters. Here is the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. If you have been following this story from the beginning, then you already know that this family has been through a lot. And I just want to take a second to say that if you are dealing with something like this in your own life, if you have a parent who cannot see you or a sibling relationship that is broken, or if you just feel like you have been carrying weight that no one else can see, I want you to know that your story matters. Leave a comment below and tell me one thing you are proud of that no one in your family ever acknowledged. I read every single comment, and I will respond to as many as I can because this community is built on people who see each other, even when their families do not. In August, my father had a heart attack. It was not massive, but it was serious enough to put him in the hospital for a week. My mother called me in tears, and I dropped everything and drove to Cleveland. When I walked into that hospital room, I saw something I had never seen before. My father looked small. Not physically, he was still a big man, but lying in that bed, with tubes in his arms and monitors beeping around him, he looked like the smallness he had always tried to hide had finally caught up with him. He looked afraid. He was awake when I came in. My mother was sitting beside him, holding his hand. She looked up at me and smiled through her tears and said, "Marcus is here, Raymond." Marcus came. My father looked at me, and for a moment I braced myself for the usual dismissal, the nod, the silence, the turning away, but instead he just looked at me, really looked at me, and his eyes filled with tears. He did not say anything right away. I sat down in the chair on the other side of his bed, and we sat there in silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably 5 minutes. And then he spoke. His voice was hoarse and weak, and nothing like the commanding voice that had called me a burden 8 months earlier. He said, "I am sorry, Marcus." 3 words. 3 words I had waited 30 years to hear, and they hit me harder than anything he had ever said before. Harder than the dismissals, harder than the silence, harder than being called a burden on Christmas Eve. Because those 3 words meant that somewhere inside that hard, stubborn, prideful man there was a part of him that knew. There was a part of him that had always known. I said sorry for what, Dad? Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to hear him say it. I needed him to be specific. I needed it to be real. And he said, "For not seeing you. For not seeing what was right in front of me this whole time. Your mother told me everything. She told me about the weekends, about the money, about how you gave Vincent a job when nobody else would. She told me about your company and what you built, and I did not want to believe it because believing it meant that I had been wrong about you, and I could not handle being wrong. I have been wrong about a lot of things, Marcus, but I was most wrong about you." I sat there and I let those words wash over me. I did not say it is okay, because it was not okay. What he had done to me was not okay. The years of invisibility were not okay. The Christmas night was not okay. But I also knew that this man lying in this hospital bed was trying. For the first time in my life, he was actually trying. And I had to decide whether I was going to meet him halfway or let the wall between us stand forever. I reached over and took his hand. It was the first time I had held my father's hand since I was a small child. His grip was weak, but he held on tight, and we sat there, father and son, in a hospital room in Cleveland, Ohio, with the beeping of monitors and the shuffle of nurses in the hallway and 30 years of silence finally starting to break. He came home from the hospital a week later. Recovery was slow. He had to change his diet and start exercising and take medication for the rest of his life. I drove to Cleveland every other weekend to help. And this time, when I walked through the door, my father did not just nod. He stood up, he walked over to me, and he hugged me. It was awkward and stiff, and his arms did not quite know where to go, but he hugged me. And each time I came back, it got a little less awkward, a little less stiff, a little more like what a hug between a father and son is supposed to feel like. Over the months that followed, we started talking, really talking, not about football or sales numbers or things he could understand, about me. He asked about my business and actually listened when I explained it. He asked about my life in Chicago and seemed genuinely interested. He even came to visit once. He walked through my office and met my team, and at one point I caught him standing in the corner just looking around with this expression on his face that I had never seen before. It took me a moment to recognize it because I had never seen it directed at me. It was pride. That following Christmas, exactly 1 year after the night he called me a burden, I drove to Cleveland again. My mother had planned another dinner. The whole family was there. Vincent was doing well at the company and had started dating someone new. My mother was still in remission and looking healthier than she had in years. And my father was different, not completely transformed. People do not change overnight. And 30 years of habits do not disappear in 12 months, but different enough, softer, more present, more willing to sit in the discomfort of his own emotions instead of pushing them onto everyone else. After dinner, we were all sitting in the living room and my father cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him and he said, "I want to say something. I am not good at this. You all know I am not good at this, but I need to say it. He looked at me. He said, Marcus, I spent most of your life not understanding you, and because I did not understand you, I made you feel like you did not matter. That is the worst thing a father can do to his son, and I am sorry. I am sorry for every time I looked through you, for every time I compared you to your brother, for every time I made you feel like you were not enough. You are enough. You have always been enough. I was just too blind and too proud to see it. And then he said something that broke me. He said that certificate on the refrigerator, the one from when you were 13, I kept it. It is in my dresser drawer. I have had it this whole time. I did not know how to tell you that I was proud of you, but I always was. I lost it. I completely fell apart. 30 years of holding it together and I just let go. I cried in front of my whole family and I did not care. My mother was crying. Vincent was crying. Even Sandra was crying. And my father got up from his chair and walked over to me and he held me. He held his son. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was home. Not the house. Not Cleveland. He was home. And I had finally found my way there. I am not going to pretend that everything is perfect now. My father and I still have hard days. There are still moments where the old patterns try to creep back in. There are still silences that last a beat too long. But the difference is that now we fight through them. Now when the silence comes, we sit in it together instead of letting it push us apart. And that is everything. That is the whole difference between a family that survives and a family that does. It is not about never hurting each other. It is about choosing to come back after you do. I want to end this story by talking directly to you. If you grew up with a parent who could not see you, I want you to know something. Their blindness was never about your worth. It was about their limitations. You were never a burden. You were never too much or too little or too different. You were always enough. And if no one in your family has ever told you that, then let me be the first. You are enough. You have always been enough, and the people who cannot see that are not seeing clearly. That is their loss, not yours. If this story meant something to you, I would be honored if you would subscribe to this channel. I tell stories like this because I believe that when we share our pain honestly, it loses some of its power over us. And I believe that when one person hears their own experience reflected in someone else's words, it reminds them that they are not as alone as they thought. So subscribe, leave a comment, tell me your story, or just tell me that you are here. That is enough. You being here is enough. And one more thing, that watch I bought my father for Christmas, the one I gave him the night he called me a burden. He wears it every single day, every day. He told me once that he wears it to remind himself of what he almost lost. Not the watch. Me. He almost lost me, and every time he looks at his wrist, he remembers that second chances are not free. They are earned. One day at a time, one conversation at a time, one hug at a time. My name is Marcus, and I was never a burden, and neither are you. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one.